And I think a year ago, the fact that we reacted very, very strongly to what the U.S. was doing to us was a wake-up call in Canada. And we've been dealing with this trade war. It's been tough, but Canadians are tough and extremely resilient, and I must say resourceful. So in that sense, there are many things, we've been saying back home, there are lots of things we can't control. We can't control what's going on in Washington, but there are many things we can control. And we can control who we're doing business with. So obviously, you heard the Prime Minister, we have access to 1.5 billion people in terms of market. We have a free trade agreement with Europe. We just came out of China where we were able to stabilize our relationship also and have a new strategic partnership. We also came out of Qatar. We've been to the UAE. We've been everywhere around the world because diversification of our trade has been at the core of what we do.
By sunrise, the damage is already done. Grocery bills are jumping across the Midwest. Canadian factories are freezing their shipments the moment the news hits. Truck drivers sitting on both sides of the border don't know if their loads will clear customs. They don't know if they are getting paid. Gas prices are about to spike by 75 cents a gallon. And somewhere in Washington, a single pen is redrawing the economic map of North America forever. This is not old news. This is not something that happened last decade and got forgotten. This is happening right now, today, in the present moment. And most people have no idea how close the entire North American economy came to breaking apart completely. On February 1st, 2025, President Donald Trump signs executive orders imposing 25% tariffs on every single import coming out of Canada and Mexico.
In terms of the SCOTUS decision, Maria, this is really a national security issue. When you think about it, the way President Trump has been able to use his IEPA powers for national security, if the Supreme Court goes the other way, it will be a loss for the American people. That President Trump, look at the drop in fentanyl deaths because President Trump was able to put fentanyl tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada.
Canadian energy exports get a slightly softer blow, 10%, but make no mistake, this is not a negotiation. This is a declaration. The official justification is simple. Illegal immigration. Fentanyl pouring across both borders. Trump is citing an invasion. But as the weeks unfold and the real damage becomes visible, it becomes clear that this is not just about drugs or migrants. This is about power. This is about control. And for one country sitting right next door, it is about whether it can survive at all without the largest economy on the planet. To make this legal, Trump invokes something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEPA, a 1977 law originally written for national emergencies. He uses it to completely bypass the USMCA, the trade agreement the United States itself helped negotiate just years earlier. His argument is straightforward. Canada and Mexico are profiting unfairly off American consumers.
And upend the global economy.
There could be some temporary short-term disruption.
President Trump signing a trio of executive orders imposing 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, with the lower 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas and 10% tariffs on goods from China.
The deficit with Canada alone, he claims, runs as high as $200 billion. Critics have been pointing out for weeks that many of those figures are misleading. Some are completely fabricated, but by the time the arguments finish, the orders are already signed, the tariffs are already moving, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop them. Now, to understand just how dangerous this moment really is, you have to look at the numbers, the actual numbers. In 2024, nearly 800 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods crossed the border between Canada and the United States. Over 70% of everything Canada produces and exports goes directly to American markets. That is not a trade relationship built on mutual benefit. That is a lifeline. Remove it, and an entire national economy starts bleeding out. Mexico tells exactly the same story. Roughly 800 billion US dollars in commerce in 2024 alone. More than 75% of Mexican exports are headed straight for American soil. Cars, steel, electronics, energy, agricultural products, all of it flowing across borders with almost no friction. Built on decades of cooperation, trust, and carefully negotiated agreements between three nations. The North American economy is not three separate systems running side by side. It is one single single machine, deeply integrated, tightly connected at every level, and Trump has just thrown a wrench right into the center of it. The first response from Ottawa is fury, pure, unfiltered, and immediate. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls the tariffs an existential threat to Canada.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada will retaliate with 25% tariffs on $106 billion worth of American goods, calling on his citizens to buy Canadian.
It might mean opting for Canadian rye over Kentucky bourbon, or foregoing Florida orange juice altogether.
He means every single word. Within hours, Canada announces $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs on American goods flooding into Canadian markets. Liquor, vegetables, appliances, sports equipment, anything carrying an American label becomes a target. But this is not just the government making noise. Something far bigger is happening across the country, on the ground, in real time, in ways that no politician planned or predicted. A Buy Canadian movement explodes overnight. It is not organized from the top down. It starts with people. Ordinary Canadians deciding, quietly, deliberately, one purchase at a time, to stop buying American. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford orders every single government-run liquor store to pull American alcohol off the shelves. Gone. Completely removed. In Quebec, Premier François Legault does the same thing. And then he goes even further. He begins reviewing every single government contract that involves a U.S. supplier. Every one of them, from scratch, at hockey games, at football stadiums, in arenas stretching from coast to coast. Fans begin booing the American national anthem. Not quietly, not politely, loudly, deliberately. The sentiment fills the air. Something fundamental has shifted in how Canadians view the country to their south. And then Trump does something that nobody in Ottawa sees coming. He begins publicly suggesting that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. He calls Trudeau, the sitting prime minister of a sovereign nation, a governor. He looks at the 49th parallel, the border that has divided two independent countries for over a century, and calls it an artificial line, a line that should not exist. Trudeau fires back immediately. There is not, he says, a snowball's chance in hell that Canada is ever joining the United States. The room goes very quiet after that statement, but Trudeau's time is already running short. The man who will actually reshape Canada's future, he is already waiting in the wings, quietly, patiently, watching every move. Justin Trudeau resigns in early 2025, and the Liberal Party turns to someone that most people outside of Canada barely know by name. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England. A man who has spent his entire career inside the rooms where global money decisions get made. He understands how leverage works, how nations survive when the ground is shifting underneath them, how to stay calm when everything around you is burning. Where Trudeau spoke to Canadians, with emotion, with nationalism, with fire, Carney speaks to the world. He speaks in numbers, in strategy, in long-term coalitions. He does not shout. He does not perform. He calculates. Carney wins a minority government in the April 2025 federal election. And almost immediately, the entire tone of this conflict changes. The anger is still there, deep and real, but now it is being channeled into something far sharper, something far more dangerous to Washington than any retaliatory tariff could ever be, because anger burns out. Strategy does not. He does not panic. He does not escalate just to make headlines. He looks at the board the way a chess master does. He sees 3 moves ahead, 4, 5, and he starts moving, one piece at a time. His first real test comes in May 2025. He walks into the White House, sits down across from Donald Trump, looks him in the eye. Trump does what Trump always does. He makes the pitch. Canada would be better off as part of the United States. It is obvious. It makes sense economically. It makes sense geographically. Why resist what is inevitable? Carney listens. He lets Trump finish speaking, and then he replies, and this single line becomes one of the most quoted sentences of the entire trade war. As you know from real estate, there are some places that are not for sale. Trump smiles. Carney does not flinch, does not blink, does not look away, and from that moment on, everything between these two countries shifts permanently. Now, while Canada is choosing confrontation, Mexico is making a completely different calculation. Mexico is choosing something far more difficult, far more uncomfortable to watch: patience. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum understands something that many observers watching from outside are completely missing. Mexico's economy simply cannot survive survive a prolonged, sustained trade war with the United States. This is not a question of pride. It is not about politics or ego. It is pure math. Economists are projecting a 4% drop in GDP if the tariffs stay in place for any meaningful length of time. That is not a bad quarter. That is not a temporary slowdown. That is a full national economic collapse. So Sheinbaum does not retaliate. Not right away. Not even close. She negotiates. She sends 10,000 National Guard troops to the southern border. A direct, visible, undeniable answer to Trump's stated concerns about migration and security. Her government raids opioid labs across the country. She gives Washington exactly what it says it wants. One carefully chosen concession at a time. Buying days, buying weeks. Buying breathing room with every single move she makes. The cost of this strategy is visible on the ground, if you know where to look. In northern Mexico, factories that were running 3 shifts a day are now running 1. Sometimes less than that. Workers are waiting, quietly, with growing anxiety, scrolling through headlines about the peso every night before bed, wondering if the diplomacy that is currently holding their jobs together is going to last, or if everything is about to fall apart without warning. But it works. By August 2025, because of Mexico's careful, disciplined maneuvering and strict compliance with every term of the USMCA, over 85% of trade between the 3 nations remains tariff-free. The political trust between governments is fractured. The damage to relationships is real. But the economic collapse that every single analyst on television was predicting, it does not happen. Not for Mexico. Canada hit back hard. Mexico played it cool. The same massive threat sitting on top of both countries. Completely opposite responses. And both, in their own different way, managed to survive. Everything that has been building for 11 months now comes together on one single stage. January 20th, 2026, the World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland. Mark Carney walks onto one of the most watched stages in all of global politics, and the room falls completely silent before he even opens his mouth. Delegates who were scrolling through their phones just moments ago look up. Journalists lean forward in their seats. Photographers lower their cameras and just watch. Everyone in that room understands what is about to happen. Something is about to shift. Something permanent. Carney does not waste time on pleasantries. He does not open with a joke. He does not offer a diplomatic nod to the crowd. He goes straight to it. He tells the assembled leaders of the global economy, the rules-based international order has not simply changed. It has experienced a rupture, a break so deep, so fundamental, that the assumptions everyone in this room built their entire careers on, they simply no longer hold. The idea that great powers honor their agreements. The idea that economic cooperation serves everyone sitting at the table. The idea that if you play by the rules, you are protected by them. Those assumptions, Carney says clearly and without hesitation, are gone. He warns them directly. Economic integration is now being weaponized. Supply chains, once celebrated as the very foundation of modern global prosperity, have become vulnerabilities that stronger nations can exploit whenever they choose, without warning, without negotiation, without apology. And then he says the line. The one line that every single person in that room will remember, long after they leave Davos and go back to their offices and their boardrooms. Middle powers must act together, because if we are not at the table, we are on the menu. The room goes completely still. Then, slowly, the applause begins. It starts in one corner of the hall, spreads, builds, grows louder. This is not polite applause. This is not the kind of clapping you give simply because a speech has ended. This is recognition. This is shared agreement, deep, uncomfortable, honest agreement from people who have been thinking exactly this for months. For some of them, years. But nobody had the courage to say it out loud. Not until now. Carney calls for a coalition of middle powers to build something new. Not a coalition directed against any single nation. A coalition built against a system. A system where one unpredictable, powerful hegemon can unravel decades of cooperation with a single signature on a single morning. The standing ovation lasts longer than anyone in the room expects. Trump speaks the next day. Same forum, same stage in Davos. His response is exactly what you would expect. Canada lives because of the United States. 2 men, same relationship, 2 completely different sides of it. Neither one is entirely wrong, but only one of them is building something that lasts. Words spoken in Davos mean nothing if nothing actually changes back home. So Canada starts rebuilding, quietly, systematically, deliberately, from the ground up. Industry Minister Melanie Joly has been planning this for months. The strategy is deceptively simple on paper, but it is radical in practice. Make the United States genuinely irrelevant to Canada's core economy, not through protest, not through angry speeches, through actual, structural independence. Under the new Buy Canadian Act, every major federal project across the country is now required to source Canadian steel, Canadian labor, Canadian engineering, Canadian design, by default. No exceptions without written justification submitted, reviewed, and formally approved. Steel plants in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie, plants that spent decades producing parts for the American auto industry, are being retooled right now. Today, they are no longer building components for Detroit. They are building Canadian bridges, Canadian railways, Canadian infrastructure. The supply chain is being repointed piece by piece, deliberately and systematically, away from Washington. Defense sees the single biggest investment shift in a generation. Joly announces an $81 billion commitment spread over 5 years. Drones, military aircraft, artificial intelligence systems designed for national defense. All of it developed and manufactured on Canadian soil. For a country that has relied on American military partnership for generations, this is not a small adjustment. This is a complete, fundamental departure. Canada even begins seriously considering the possibility of cutting off oil exports to the United States entirely. Just the serious consideration of it, the credible threat alone, sends immediate shockwaves through energy markets on both sides of the border. But not everyone is celebrating this industrial pivot. Critics speak up, economists warn that this kind of rapid industrial restructuring could raise costs for ordinary Canadians, it could slow national growth, it could make everyday life measurably more expensive for the people who can least afford it right now. Carney hears every single one of these warnings. He does not dismiss them. He acknowledges the risk openly, publicly, and honestly. He simply accepts it. Because the alternative, continuing to depend completely on a relationship that just proved it can vanish overnight without notice, is a far worse risk. Joly puts it plainly, we are no longer asking what America wants. We are asking what Canada needs. This diversification is not happening only inside Canada's borders. It is happening across the entire globe. To reduce its growing dependence on American markets, Carney's government signs a landmark trade deal with China. Lower tariffs on Canadian agricultural exports. Roughly $7 billion in brand new market access, unlocked through a single agreement. This is not a pivot toward China. Carney makes that distinction deliberately, clearly, and publicly. This is a pivot away from dependence on any single partner. Canada is not looking for a new master to replace the old one. It is looking for options, diversified options, so that no single trade relationship can ever hold the entire country hostage again. Trump does not see it that way. He threatens a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. He accuses Ottawa of acting as a drop-off point for Chinese imports flooding into North American markets. The accusation gets headlines. It is loud and forceful. The actual evidence supporting it is remarkably thin. Carney does not back down. He clarifies, Canada is not pursuing a full free trade agreement with Beijing, but he makes one thing absolutely clear to every person listening. Canadian sovereignty is not something Washington gets to dictate. Not today, not tomorrow, no matter how large the tariff threat becomes. Behind every press conference, behind every carefully worded diplomatic statement, behind every headline, real people are paying the actual price for all of this, and most of them never voted for any of it, never asked for it. Never saw it coming. In March 2025, the U.S. stock market loses $4 trillion in value. In weeks, not months, weeks. Investors are in full panic. Markets are swinging wildly every time a new statement comes out of Washington. Supply chain forecasts are turning dark overnight. Inflation fears are spreading faster than any government reassurance can reach ordinary Americans. The mood across Wall Street shifts from confidence to genuine fear. In a matter of days, the average American household loses roughly $1,200 in purchasing power in a single quarter. Gas prices are climbing. Grocery costs are climbing. Heating bills are climbing. The people feeling this first are not politicians sitting in comfortable offices. They are not CEOs watching market dashboards from corner offices. They are ordinary people filling up gas tanks and watching the numbers spin higher. They are parents pushing carts through supermarket aisles, watching prices climb, watching savings shrink, and having absolutely no control over any of it. Small businesses along the border on both sides are shutting down. Restaurants that depended on cross-border tourism are closing their doors. Farmers in both countries are watching export markets dry up in real time. The ripple effect of 25% tariffs does not stay on Wall Street. It moves into Main Street, into kitchens, into conversations at dinner tables across the continent. Canadian tourism to the United States drops by 40%. That single statistic alone costs the American economy an estimated $4 billion every year. In response, the Trump administration begins requiring any Canadian citizen entering the U.S. for more than 30 days to be fingerprinted and formally registered in a government database. A measure that feels, to many Canadians, less like border security and more like a statement about how Washington now views its neighbors. The trade war is no longer something you read about on a screen. It is in wallets. It is at checkout counters. It is at every single border crossing on this continent. It is in the daily lives of millions of people who never asked for any of this. By 2026, the relationship between the United States and Canada looks nothing like it did just 12 months ago. Canada has diversified trade relationships with India, with ASEAN nations across Southeast Asia, with partners across Europe, all of them deepening, deliberately, strategically, permanently. Domestic industry is being rebuilt from scratch. The Buy Canadian movement is no longer a reaction born from anger. It is national policy now, written into law, funded by the government, supported by the people. This trade war has proven something that people have assumed for years, but that almost nobody ever had the courage to say out loud. The era of unchallenged American economic hegemony is not ending because of China. It is not ending because of Russia. It is not ending because of any distant rival on the other side of the world. It is being challenged right now in real time every single day by the countries that trusted Washington the most, the ones that built their economies around American reliability, the ones that believed the partnership was permanent. It was not permanent, and now everyone knows it. For the first time in over a century, America's closest neighbor is choosing autonomy over access. The question now is not whether Canada can survive without the United States. Canada is already proving every single day that it can. The real question, the one that will shape the next decade of global politics, is whether the United States can still lead a world that no longer feels safe enough to follow. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this video is based on public information, historical context, and my own analysis. It is not a call to action. It is not an instruction. It is not a claim about anyone's intentions. It is simply one perspective on a fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can look at the same set of facts and reach completely different conclusions, and that is healthy. That is exactly how open societies are supposed to work. No matter where you stand on any of this, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, peace, without fear, without hate. You are welcome to share your own perspective in the comments, respectfully, thoughtfully. Thank you for watching, and thank you for thinking critically. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives.